Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight is the 29th edition of Viewers Edition. You all know every last Wednesday of the month, the resident panelists discuss topics that you, our viewers, have suggested for us over our social media feeds. And tonight, the topics for discussion are the Rwanda-United Kingdom Asylum Act, as well as recent developments in the Rwanda-Uganda relations, and time allowing a couple of more topics that have been put forward by our viewers. My name is Dan Mpisi, host of The Square. As always, I'm happy to welcome the Square resident panelists, and on my left, after a long time, we're happy to have you. It feels so long. Berna Nampata, resident panelist of The Square. Great to have you on the show, Berna.
Thank you.
Great. Also joining us as always, Charles Haba, resident panelist on The Square. Great to have you.
Same here, Dan. How are you?
Good.
To see you, Berna.
Yes. Great. So the first issue we're going to talk about, and these graphics will be displayed on the screens indicating what we are discussing tonight. We have the Rwanda-UK Asylum Pact, the Rwanda-United Kingdom Migration Pact, and on Thursday, 14th April, Rwanda and the United Kingdom signed a migration and economic development partnership, which will see migrants and asylum seekers who are legally in the UK transferred to Rwanda. Now, there have been polarized views on this particular issue. United Kingdom citizens, citizens across the world, Rwandans as well, some who are for it and some who are against it. Those who are for it, say that Rwanda has a track record when it comes to taking care of refugees and asylum seekers, evidenced by, in the last couple of years, refugees from Burundi, from neighboring DRC, Congo, from DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as other countries, as far as Afghanistan, as far as Libya, as we have seen in the transition camps. So we do have a track record in helping the global migration crisis, and some have looked at this as an innovation way to help and deal with this migration crisis. Others have seen it as a sort of a barter, so to speak, amongst human beings being traded, and the United Kingdom shirking its responsibility, or others even saying Rwanda is too small with too few resources to take on more people, in addition to being one of the most densely populated countries in Africa. So, a lot of polarized views on this, and like I said, some are for it. Rwanda currently hosts over 130,000 refugees, but still, there are people who say this is not a good idea, and there's some who are saying, let's just wait and see what happens. So here on The Square tonight, as asked to discuss by our viewers, is this topic, the Rwanda-UK Migration and Economic Development Partnership, also commonly referred to as the Rwanda-UK Asylum Pact. And Charles, I'll start with your views on this topic before going to Berna, but I'll also like to encourage our viewers to also share the comments using hashtag #TheSquareRW that we'll read later on Viewers Edition 29. Charles, over to you.
I'll start with a disclaimer that I'm biased. I'm biased in the sense that by virtue of the fact that I'm in the real estate space, the moment they announced that there were thousands of people coming to Rwanda, and these people would need accommodation, I threw a party in the office. But so I must say that I am biased to that extent that that we're super excited in the real estate space that some of these apartments and houses and struggling hotels and what have you are going to there is hope that they will get occupancy. Disclaimer aside, I think I said it on the show last week that I'd really like some of what this government smokes, because I think when you look at the amazing things that this government does, and you just have to be in awe of the leadership. Now, if people are running away from their countries for whatever reason, it could be political, it could be economic, it could be social, it could be, whatever reason that there is. And then there's another country that is offering them sanctuary. I think that is something to be extremely applauded. But putting that aside, economics of refugees, however you look at it, can be a right jab, especially post-COVID. And I think there's also been a bit of an issue in terms of whether you take advantage of people's demise for an economic gain. And that's a bit of the stick that you can get from the naysayers. Because I was watching a clip earlier today by the strong South African critic Julius Malema, who is literally, you know, equating the pact to slave trade, you know. I think that's is the most of extremes, but it's probably because the communication has not been as thorough as it should have been. And this, if you listen to the President's remarks last night, if you listen to the British Foreign Secretary Privy Patel and the British High Commissioner here in Rwanda, you can see that this conversation has been going on, these negotiations have been going on for a very long time, for up to 9 months. Now you wonder, in the run-up to this, all the preparations that have been going on, is it that we did not anticipate the backlash? Is it that we did not prepare enough on the communication side of things? Is it that we thought that it is a super fantastic deal that nobody would ever want to criticize it? So those are my few yes. Yeah.
Before I go to Brenna, I personally, you know, I'm one of those people, the proponents of the school of thought of let's wait and see. It could be a very innovative aspect to dealing with this global migration crisis. You know, we're offering them definitely for some what is better than what they're being dealt with. You know, detention camps in Libya, or the lack of dignity some of them face in these countries, even in the UK. But just to pick on what you said, Charles, I feel like the communication around it was very sort of short-sighted in terms of preparation. It's such a hectic announcement, you know. And, you know, before we kicked off the show, Berna was telling me, you know, a lot of people have bought into the Rwandan vision, you know. So a lot of people also demand explanations when they don't understand. I'm talking about non-Rwandans. So we have a track record of, you know, taking time to, before we implement certain things, engage, you know, I don't say debate and consult. Some decisions were going to be taken nonetheless, but informing and engaging people to understand what's happening. So I feel like with this, it was just, you know, a bomb was dropped. Let's see what happens. Hopefully the communication moving forward will be much more than it was prior to the announcement. Lots of questions out there. What happens, you know, after a certain duration that's been mentioned? What happens in a couple of years, and so forth and so on. And I hope there's a campaign around just really trying to inform people as much as possible compared to the communication before this announcement was made. So, you know, I agree with you in terms of the comms around it. Brenna?
It's a complex issue. And from where I stand as a journalist, I'm not expected to decide. So, but we can just look at the facts at hand. One, I think that for many people, it is not a surprise, given what Rwanda has already been doing in this space. But I think we also take it for granted that whatever we are doing, people are aware, you know. And to your earlier point around communication, it is only now that we are highlighting that we have over 1,000, you know, we have a huge community of refugees.
130,000 plus, yes.
And our peacekeeping missions, and, you know, Rwanda's ambitions in the international space. So we take it for granted sometimes that everybody's aware. And so this week, I mean, for the last 2-3 weeks, the question is, how come, and then you have to go back and say, look, this is where we're coming from. Yeah. But I feel that, I like that one, it is very clear on why it's being done. There are still questions. Of course, it is always going to be subject to debate, misinterpretation, but I feel that as a country, we have to realize that the more you take on these international obligations, it ceases to just be a Rwandan issue. You can't afford to say you will not explain as such because as Rwandans you have taken a decision, because it involves other parties.
Brenna, let's just get back to you in a minute before we fix your microphone. Okay. But let's just go back to Charles on this. But sorry, some technical issues. But yeah, based on what Brenna is saying, Charles, would you like to add on that?
Yes, I want to talk about the economics of refugees and what it means, because when you look at it, and I insinuated something to do with what it means for the property market and the real estate market and accommodation, and how it would be a big game changer. I mean, for crying out loud, 4,500 people are very, very many in a country like Rwanda. And if these people are coming from the UK, they are not like the refugees, the 130,000 that Bana was talking about that we've had over the last several years, over the last 25 years, who are from Tanzania, the DRC, Burundi, and who are really in dire need. I think there were even some Libyans that we hosted who have been put in refugee camps, Mahama, Jihembe, Gashora, and the others, and these are really your textbook definition of refugee camps. Now, these are not the kind. For crying out loud, they have come on aeroplanes, they have been in the UK, you know, probably some of them came on the flight with Bana. You know, these are Bazungu refugees, if you may wish. I mean, they ended up in the UK for crying out loud. So, therefore, the expectations, their expectations, first of all, that they had already reached the UK. It is their dream. There's lots of middlemen there who are paid thousands of dollars to ensure that they go through these harsh conditions on the Mediterranean and what have you. Some even lose their lives along the way, and they get there. And then for you to get them out of the UK and bring them into Rwanda, you're not going to take them to Mahama and Jihembe and Gashora and the other refugee camps. So at a bare minimum, they'll have a decent life. Now, bring them here to Kachiro, Nyamirambo, or Gisozi, or wherever you're going to put them. And imagine what they are going to do for just that community around there. We've signed a deal with the UK, so I imagine that they will also have some few pounds of stipend, daily subsistence allowance. The boutiques around that area, and I'm talking about the economics of refugees, the multiplier effect. Assume, for argument's sake, that every refugee, and I'll pick a small figure because I don't know the exact amount that every refugee will be entitled to. Assume they have 100,000 francs to spend every month, and they are 100 in every village. They'll buy sugar, they'll buy soap. The guy who has a little boutique that he has been selling a kilo a day will probably be selling a sack a week. You know, and you look, the food, the transport, the clothing, the whatever, the multiplier effect of 1,000 people in one district is going to be extremely enormous. So the economics of the refugees, if you look at it in terms of how big of a game changer it's going to be, it's extremely enormous. Now, there's a bigger story here. And the bigger story is if Rwanda is able to pull it off and show the world that we are a fantastic alternative to your European dream, then this can be on for years and decades to come. For crying out loud, the UK gets the most talented refugees and they play for it: football, cricket, sports. They end up, working for them in their labor force. So why shouldn't we look at the creme de la creme and fill up our spaces? Maybe it could be an opportunity for us to play the African Cup of Nations. Yeah. So the economics and the opportunities around the refugees are extremely enormous. Yeah.
Thanks, Charles. Brenna, sorry, we had a technical issue with you earlier on, but I think we're good to go now.
Okay.
Yes, sorry, you were saying.
Yes, just to reinforce that, one, it's a bold decision. It's a bold decision because, and part of why it's getting a lot of publicity is that Rwanda stands out as an African country in this space of, you know, punching above its weight to, you know, be in the club of providing solutions in the global space. And the mindset currently is not yet there for the majority of, whether it's Africans or non-Africans, to understand that being small does not limit your ambition, or being poor does not mean that you cannot you know, participate or be part of providing a solution. We know this, that we know that even at a personal level, you don't give because you have excess. You know, the principle of giving, of compassion, is that you care for others. You know, it has nothing to do with how much you have. You know, so I feel that the criticism around being a poor country is actually misplaced. Yeah, and no country is permanently poor. You know. And I think he was very clear in his speech last night that that working so hard to get better. So the criticism that Rwanda is getting around it being poor, I think, is misplaced. The other issue we are seeing again is we already have Rwandans that are unemployed. So if you say you're going to offer opportunities to migrants, what happens to Rwandans? There's also that narrative. But we cannot forget that in history, when we look around, and Charlie touched around this, migrants have done so much for the developed world. Whether it's UK, whether it's US, for the advanced world, actually for most of them for a very long time, and up to today, continue to, you know, depend on migrants. We see, for instance, the US with Mexico, you know, Mexicans in the US. First of all, that migration was driven by the shortage of casual labor in the US, and then eventually, today, Mexicans have moved on to become doctors, and, you know, so there is potential. And I think that to zero down to saying, you know, you're an African country, you're small, and for me, it doesn't make sense. The other point I wanted to make is that I feel that as a country, we have to understand that as we take on these international obligations, then you will expect to be challenged and be questioned as to why you are doing them. Like I said, one, because it's not typical of an African country, but also to the Rwandans. Rwandans need to know why these decisions are being made. So far, I think there's been a lot of focus in responding to foreigners, what they're saying about Rwanda, you know, about the partnership. Not so much has been done in terms of explaining to Rwandans why the country is doing this. We shouldn't take it for granted that, you know, Rwandans will buy in. Ultimately, you need a buy-in from the locals, because these are the people that will be hosting these refugees. They're the people that eventually will have to live with them and work with them.
Exactly.
So you really have to take a lot of time explaining to them why you're doing it, the rationale. And maybe even if it may not make sense now, explain to them the longer-term view. Thirdly, I feel that, again, looking at the controversy around this, if you look at the record of the Rwandan government so far, I think it speaks for itself. And Rwandans have until up to 2024, I think, to decide whether they want to continue with the current government or not. So far, it appears they're happy with how they're being led, you know. So for me, I feel the focus right now should be on helping Rwandans to understand why we're doing what we're doing and what is in it for them in the long term. Yeah.
So, in a nutshell, you know, the three of us are here. Are we for it, against it, you know, wait and see? I mean, concluding, you know, this particular topic, what's your take, Raina?
I mean, it's a pilot. It's a pilot, but we also know that they have tried to do it somewhere else and it has not worked. So there's that risk, which I think both parties are aware of. It is a pilot. The key word there is pilot. They're trying to see if it works. So if you take on a risk, I think it's fair to say you have to give it a chance to see whether it works. It's being tested. Now, it is difficult. I mean, global migration is a difficult issue. No country can solve it on its own. And I think part of the concern that we're seeing today is that, and which is legitimate, is that the West cannot continue or start to outsource its responsibilities to the developing world, you know, because in the first place, they have the resources that would address some of these issues, but also, on the other hand, sometimes they're part of the problem, you know. Exactly. If we look at the underlying issues, I mean, if you look at Libya, for instance, so it's difficult at this point to say I am for or against. It is, first of all, the deal is still going quite through a lot of processes, at least for the UK. We don't know whether it's done until it's done. But so far, I think Rwanda is on the right side of history. Compassion, being able to say I'm willing to help, should not really be about how small you are or how poor you are. But again, the reality is it is complex. Again, because Rwanda has positioned itself as not just a model in Africa. You know, if you look at the Visit Rwanda campaign, how you reconcile people coming to Rwanda for tourism, you know, the people you want to attract for tourism, and then people who are forced on planes to come to Rwanda, you know, that is difficult. But again, it's a bold decision, and we'll have to wait and see how it works out.
How it pans out, yeah. Charles?
I am not as confused as Bana. Me, I'm entirely pro it, and I've mentioned it for two reasons. One, that I am biased, and I did explain my biasness at the beginning of the show.
You give a caveat.
But secondly, because of the economics, I think we have a lot to benefit as a country. I've mentioned consumption, which is a very big factor. But also, I think once the population around wherever they will be settled is sensitized, such that we do not have any resentment from the people who will welcome them in their communities, then we should not have a problem. I think that's the next step that government should really do. I have not yet seen it happening around the sensitization. I don't know whether it's because we're waiting for the first batch to arrive, or we're still fighting out the fires that are coming out from the likes of Julius Malema and others who have not really understood where it's coming from. But I am fully pro it, and I think it's a fabulous move.
And I like what both of you have said. Migrants or refugees have been the pinnacle of spearheading some innovations in different countries around the world, including these countries where you know, they're aspiring to go to. So I don't see that being any different in Rwanda. We have a track record, like I said earlier on, of you know, really enabling refugees to live here in a dignified manner, as seen with the Libyans that were brought over, you know, a couple of years ago, starting 2018, 2019, from the detention centers. You know, the Afghani population that was affected, a school of girls and women was brought to Rwanda. The school has been thriving. I don't see what's any different for us opening our borders and saying we're able to take care of even other souls that are definitely in need of this. It's just the technicalities, and like I think all of us are agreeing, the communication about it to the Rwandan populations who will live with these people, who will coexist with these people, and I think it needs to be done as soon as possible. Not when they arrive, but way before that. So
just before you move on, the migrants,
sure.
you said something that I think we need to contextualize in terms of our history, our Rwandan history.
Yes.
That a very big section of Rwandans have lived as migrants in different parts of the world. Some have not yet even come back home. Some are very integral in their different societies everywhere in the world. So if there's anyone who understands the pain and the value and what have you of being a migrant, it is Rwandans. So if you're able to lend out a helping hand, the best person to be able to lend out a helping hand is that one who has ever been a migrant.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think it's just natural that we should not be selfish.
Absolutely.
Yes,
And I feel
yes.
I feel like this is where our leadership was going in looking at really working with this sort of pact. I feel like our leadership, if anything, was, we bore the brunt of being refugees and migrants in different countries for a long, long time, and why not ease the suffering of some of these people who are going through it right now? So to our viewers, just keep the conversation going using hashtag #TheSquareRW. The first topic that we've been discussing, that you asked us to discuss, was the Rwanda-UK Asylum Pact. Lots of controversy around it, but also lots of there's a side to it that is coming out, the innovation of it in terms of dealing with the migration crisis and offering, opportunities, even though we're a small African country, to some of these people. So keep the conversation going, the questions coming, and we'll endeavor to answer them as best as we can. The second topic for tonight is that was selected by our viewers is the developments in the Rwanda-Uganda relations. And a little over a month ago, I remember we had this same conversation on this table, on the square, evidenced by the visit of Lieutenant General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, his 2 visits to Rwanda just earlier on this year. And we had a conversation about, what does this mean for Rwanda and Uganda? And just over this weekend, we had His Excellency President Paul Kagame visit Uganda. He had a private visit in Uganda, the first in 4 years, and where he met with and had bilateral talks with His Excellency President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda, as well as attending the 48th birthday of Kainerugaba's 48th birthday. So the talks, of course, with Museveni were on regional peace and security. So it brings us to the question tonight. Charles Brennan, we've had this conversation, I think, since 2018, when relations were frosty. The relations seem to be thawing somehow. And my question to you, and I'll kick off with you, Charles, is what is your take on the recent development between these 2 countries, and what are your expectations in the future?
I think whenever we talk peace, we have a reason to celebrate. Wars and quarrels and skirmishes and disagreements, they never build any society. So whenever there's room for peace, there's room to share a glass of wine and a meal and or whether the dirt has been buried under the carpet or whether you want to forgive and forget is a different story. But when you talk peace, it means you're looking at the bigger picture. You want to mean well, and you don't want the sufferings of your people to continue existing. So that is one thing, and I think the leadership of this country and the leadership of Uganda as well need to be highly lauded for that. Now, I think the other thing is to talk about how you arrive at that, and politics is a very interesting game, and whoever thought that cow politics and birthday politics would ever lead to Rwanda and Uganda, or President Kagame and President Museveni sitting on the same dining table again. At a time when the warmongers were celebrating that they are going to see guns blazing, you know, political brains came down and said, hang on a second, 48 is actually a very big milestone, whether you like it or not. But also exchanging cows is not a bad thing after all. Yeah. And while you put it into consideration, in context that not too long ago, the two leaders had exchanged cows. So several years later, when they can't see each other eye to eye, cows come into the picture, and then fast forward, a birthday party is seen. So the politics of that, I think, hats off to whoever came up with that extremely brilliant idea. Now, the bigger picture actually is in how we move forward, and I think Rwanda has made a very loud statement in terms of its position that whereas when our troubles had started brewing, everybody was wondering how this economy was going to survive without Uganda. Rwandan leadership had already carved out a plan of showing that we do not necessarily need Uganda. Now, business people are mobilized. Of course, it wasn't picture perfect, for especially from a social perspective, the families and what have you. Things were very rough. It went on for about maybe 4 years, if my memory serves me right. And by the time, you know, the Banyarwanda have a saying that's a little bit mean, that akabi kamenyerwa nk'akeza, to imply that you get used to a bad situation in the same doses in which you get used to a good situation. So we got accustomed, and we, by we I mean the country in general, that you know your relatives across the border, you'd lose somebody and you're not able to attend a funeral. On the other side, same thing, you lose somebody across this side and it's difficult to attend a funeral. And you know the social cohesion, families were split and so on. But on the survival side, on the business side, on the economic side, we figured out a way of moving on. Now, is that going to change? In my opinion, I don't think so. However, the coexistence of the people, especially from a social perspective, I think that is going to be addressed, and that is going those doors have been opened, which I think is a huge stride in the right direction. Yeah.
Great point, Charles. I'll definitely be coming to you in that sense of, you know, the alternatives in terms of trade that, you know, we had to focus on as a country, and what that means right now, and looking at the future with this, you know, I don't want to say restored, but relations that are gradually being restored. What does it mean with these alternative routes or alternative, you know, decisions that we've taken? You know, what does that mean moving forward? Brenna, over to you. Private visit by our head of state to Uganda. What does that mean? What are your expectations? What does that mean for you?
I remain consciously optimistic. I mean, mainly because if we revisit the issues that led us to where we were, so far, the people tasked with dealing with them are yet to give us a progress report.
And I know you've been very consistent.
Yes.
Whenever we talk about this, you always stick to your points. What brought us here in the first place? What's being done in that regard?
Yeah, we have not had any update from the ad hoc committee that was set up to resolve these issues. So I don't know. I mean, on what basis do we get the confidence? Now, of course, there are visible signs. Yes, people can go home. You know, they can visit. You see there's a bit of movement. I haven't seen the deportations. I don't know if they've completely stopped, but in the last, I think, two months or so, we haven't seen any deportations of Rwandans. That is progress, yeah. But whether that is sustainable, it remains to be seen, because The arrangement has remained informal. HE went to Uganda on a private trip, you know. So yes, we are seeing progress, but for me, I would want to hear from the ad hoc committee on whether the underlying issues that were raised have been addressed. Otherwise, I think HE has been consistent in terms of being open to dialogue. You may recall, even before the 4 years, he actually went to Entebbe and had a meeting, you know, raising these issues. So now what we are seeing is also someone on the other side trying to do their own thing. But Mhozi is the commander of land forces.
And special advisor.
Yeah, that's where he stops.
Yes.
Whether he has that influence to address I don't know. So, for me, I would want to hear from the ad hoc committees. At some point, there were talks that were supposed to resume. Whether those talks have resumed, I don't know. And the risk with these things is that when it's left to individuals, then what happens when they're not, you know? Yes, so it's still murky. For me, I'm cautiously optimistic. I think we really need to hear from the people who are tasked. Now, one could argue and say they failed. But even that, they should tell us that they failed, and so that process is no longer there. So that we say, okay, we will now stick to what Mhozi is trying to do. Yeah.
I think you have a very valid point, Barna, because you know, the ad hoc committee, you know, that convened, I think it was 2020, beginning of 2020, February, well, the beginning of 2020, you know, convened and said, look, from Rwanda, these are our issues. With Uganda, this is what's been happening. Uganda, so forth and so on. And this is where we are. We at, you know, we're at a point where we need to meet each other halfway and deal with these issues. We're in 2022, and like you said, it's not, you know, it's not an organ that brought this about. It's you know, an individual or two, or you know, behind the scenes sort of conversations that are going on. So I think for citizens, these issues that you've raised, it would be good to see that moving forward. Personally, my expectation, based on what you're saying, is to see, you know, in the next 3 to 6 months, some of these issues, again, in that same framework, are addressed, and a sort of update is given. You know, we had this conversation in 2020, and I think this is also what they call soft diplomacy. It kind of helps bring about some of the hard or sort of complex issues. It ushers them in, and I would like to see, you know, before the year ends, that ad hoc committee as an organ, as a functioning organ that was put in place officially to come and say, these issues between Uganda and Rwanda, this is where they stay. Instead of, you know, everyone is happy to see what's happening. Ugandans, Rwanda, a lot of people have been ululating, but let's not forget what brought us here. We would be happy to see, like I'm saying, this ad hoc committee giving an update, a status update.
Yeah, and more so, I think the list that we expect from the Ugandan government is to say Rwandans should feel safe when they come here.
No more abductions.
You know, because at first there was denial of, you know, we don't know what you're talking about, and then we saw, you know, deportations. Then we saw people coming here when, you know,
they've been tortured.
They've been tortured. So I think to kind of show that they mean and maybe support Mhozi's efforts, it would be good to have the Ugandan establishment say, look, we have addressed the concerns, and no more. There should be some form of reassurance. Yeah,
but and I think also, you know, formally.
Yeah,
you know,
formally.
I feel like what's happening now to a certain degree is a bit informal, but formal assurances, formal responses on, on this ad hoc committee that was brought about to address, these issues, sort of formal announcements on certain things. So citizens, especially citizens who are involved in trade between the two countries, can go about their business prior to these issues 4 or 5 years ago. Charles, is there something you wanted to say?
Yeah. First of all, I talking of the ad hoc committee, whether the Angolan president, the DRC president, I'm wondering what's going on in their minds. They must be saying, all these meetings we had in Katuna and Kigali and in Rwanda and all these pacts that we signed, what were they up to yet? These guys could just sit down and agree on how to sort out the issues, And it's not the first time that when we have fundamental problems with our neighbors, we have people coming in between to mediate. We had Ali Hassan Mwinyi at one point, and I think Claire Short at another point, somehow our issues were sorted out amongst ourselves without necessarily inviting guests to our parties. So I think it's a very loud message that whenever we have issues, we can deal with them ourselves, and we don't need necessarily other people to help us. But the second thing really is around, Diana, the point you raised around the soft diplomacy. And I think this is one thing that needs to be sort of really very, very highly emphasized. And when you look at, it's very easy for you to look at just a birthday party and say, it was just a birthday party. But the assurances that when a social basketball club will go to play in Kampala, that they can go and come back without them having any issues is extremely important. The assurance that you can attend a wedding or whatever kind of social event across the border and get back is extremely important. So we need to see those things happening. But even people who lost their property, people who lost their businesses, that their businesses are given back to them, that their properties are given back to them. That will be also another very huge stride in the right direction. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want us to read a couple of tweets before we go to the last topic for tonight. And the first tweet, if you could have it on our screens, is asking regarding refugees and COVID-19, will they come to Rwanda already vaccinated and boosted? That's a valid question. Again, like I said, there's so many questions around this pact that we're just waiting for some good, information to come through, which I'm very sure will from both governments. The other tweet coming on from Seromba says that, well, on the UK-Rwanda Pact, economically, this will be a developing program which will effectively enhance economic prosperity in the region by investing in upskilling, development, and projects which will benefit both migrants and their hosts. Allow me to pinpoint more on this. That's the first tweet coming in from Seromba. We have another tweet coming in, again from, I think, George. He says that many will see this pact as a bad thing simply because no information was given to them. You woke up one day with this. Anyway, whatever Rwanda does always has critics. We are used to that. Yeah, but we move. We keep on moving on and hoping for the best. And I'm sure, the leadership in making this decision was very spot on. And I think most of us will catch up to this decisions communication coming through over the next couple of months. The last topic for tonight that our viewers also asked us to touch on is the Miss Rwanda controversial activities that have been going on. I think Charles and Brenna, I think this week, the Miss Rwanda organizer is being held in custody on allegations of sexual abuse to Miss Rwanda contestants. There was a Twitter space last night, over 3,000 Rwandans convened online to just talk about this issue. I felt like it went on for too long. It was 6 hours. I would log in, log out, log in, log out. And yeah, but a lot of people had a lot to say. But key amongst it, we've discussed Miss Rwanda on the show a couple of times. We've had Miss Rwanda, former beauty pageant queens on the show as well. My take is on this issue. It's a serious issue, I think, that needs attention regarding these allegations. How long has it been happening for? What does it mean for the entire pageant, especially the victims who are coming forward with this information? And as a country, how do we deal with it? And just very briefly, in the few minutes that we have, I'd like to kick off with this, and Brenna, I'll start with you. I know Brenna is she's been very vocal when it comes to Miss Rwanda. I know it's an activity that you've never seen the use of.
Ambassador to anti-Miss Rwanda campaign.
Anti-Miss Rwanda campaign. But just briefly, Brenna, before Charles, what are your thoughts on this recent allegations?
I don't think it's a fair representation to say I'm anti. I just think that the people in charge of it have to rethink. But specifically with regards to the allegations, we should have seen it coming. I mean, if you put children in a space where they are forced, they have to compete, they have to be at their best behavior, you'll definitely have people that will take advantage of them, So it was always going to be inevitable. I think going forward, the contest, they need to perhaps consider raising the minimum age so that you have a bit of maturity. Otherwise you have very young women really being exposed, not just to sexual harassment, but all sorts of abuse, just because they are part of the pageant,
Even online abuse, I know we touched on that.
Yeah, online harassment, and they're not ready, because most of them are really young. They're really young. So maybe if you raise the minimum age and try to recruit a bit of, slightly older, then maybe you will reduce the risk. Or weigh the benefits and see if we really need it or if we can afford to do without it. That's for other agencies to that's a decision for other agencies to make. But I feel that it's unfortunate that even when we've been talking about these issues, it's difficult to talk about sexual harassment, it's difficult to talk about gender-based violence. So to expect that you have a pageant where, you have young women and then you have these, even young men also, it definitely increases the risk. The risk was always there. So we don't know if he is guilty, but I think the victims have been clear. So there's a need to really rethink the whole concept and see one, whether we need it, we can afford to do without it, or at least raise the minimum age. Yeah.
I think, just before Charles, briefly, I think for me one of the things that, and I know I mentioned it last time we talked about Miss Rwanda, and this was specifically to do with how the contestants are interviewed by somewhat scrupulous media houses that claim to be TV channels, some of these YouTube channels. And I feel like some of these girls are unaccompanied, they're not trained, and some weird questions are asked to them, and then it just circulates over social media and they're made fun of. And that lack of protection, just interacting with the media, for me is problematic. Now, imagine to hear, the Twitter space and some of former runner-up contestants coming on social media and saying a couple of things. It just begs the question, so what was happening behind the scenes? What level of protection did they have to predators within the organization or people the organization was engaged with? So definitely these young ladies coming forward and saying these things, I believe them, they have happened. And my question is the entire establishment and the lack of protection for these girls.
Very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly.
I think it is also telling that even when these allegations are out for a couple of days, the corporates behind this tournament are quiet. What message are they sending? Because yes, nobody has been sentenced, but we have victims. The corporates behind this tournament, where is your responsibility?
You mean pageant?
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
yeah.
yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I don't want to name them,
Yeah.
but we know
Yeah.
that they have sponsorships.
Yes.
So as we continue to see these allegations, why are the corporates not sending out a message and saying, look, you need to investigate these claims and, you know, take a stand?
Because
what are they waiting
their brand
for?
is associated.
Yes, yes. What are they waiting for?
Yeah. Charles?
I don't agree with Bana often, but in 1951, the Miss World age bracket was between 14 and 19. In 2020, they raised that from 18 to 27. It was definitely for a particular reason, and I believe that the reason was most likely what Bana has just pointed out around maturity. Is it time to evolve? Definitely yes. It's a wake-up call. You know, an 18-year-old girl, 19-year-old girl is still young in different ways. I just hope that there's no very stern reaction to get rid of the pageant because it's getting negative publicity. I must say I'm also a little bit biased because the gentleman who's under arrest right now is my friend, so I will hesitate to crucify him because I mean, for crying out loud, he's only a suspect. I sympathize with the ladies who have come out to say they were abused in one way or another. But the whole Miss Rwanda campaign and Miss Rwanda pageants, generally speaking, I mean Miss pageants, if that word exists, there's a good story behind it, and it's that good story that needs to be protected. On the issue of the corporates coming out, I think, and I'll give probably a related example around the volleyball federation. This country got into a big, huge embarrassment when we fielded ineligible players and Rwanda was disqualified from an international tournament we were hosting. Who bore the brunt of that? Yes. Is volleyball still played? Yes. Will we play in a World Cup? Most likely, yes. So
the same applies.
Yes, the same applies. You learn from your mistakes. You ensure that it does not happen again, because the product that you have is way bigger than individual mistakes if they have been there. Yes.
I'd like to, on this matter, I'd just like to state that it is my sincere hope that, you know, whichever organs, and whether it's the Rwanda Investigative Bureau, whether the government comes back in, because this was now a privately owned and organized event, but investigations need to go further than just these allegations. When did they start? Because if the pageant is to go on, it can't go on, you know, with the same issues. So, you know, the victims of this sexual abuse, you know, in their own time when they do come forward, we still need to investigate this pageant and make sure these issues or these structural issues are done away with, so that this doesn't continue. I'd just like to read one last tweet before we end the show, and this is, if you could have this on our screens, it's from Seromba. This is just one last tweet before we end the show, and he says that, if you could have this on our screens, this is the last tweet for tonight. He says, how Charles said, I think there's a problem with our screens, so yeah. Anyway, so we've come to the end of the show. I'd like to thank our viewers for tuning in and sharing their thoughts. We'll be reading your tweets. We'll be sharing and engaging with your tweets after the show like we always do. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you, Charles. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Brenna, always a pleasure. And to our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee, thank you for always supporting The Square. It's been a pleasure hosting Viewers Edition 29, as we do every last Wednesday of the month. So have a good night. See you again next week.